Hi everyone, it's Zach with Palantir Research. Institutional ownership is creeping up, especially as we get more info coming out with more 13F filings closing up for the second quarter of 2023. And a side note, Palantir just filed theirs as well, but today's video is focusing on not what Palantir filed, but rather who is buying Palantir stock instead. And for reference, you can check this out in more detail yourself, of course. If you just go to the biggest holders of Palantir stock, you can see there has been some buying from big recognizable names. Well, ARK is no secret, but Morgan Stanley actually increased their position by 56%. And BlackRock and Vanguard, who are already big holders with over 100 million shares, each added about 4 million shares last quarter. So there are big players who've jumped in recently, and just a word of warning, this is past information. So you shouldn't be actively trading or investing off this info as if it's real-time news. At this point, the shares have already been bought, and potentially sometimes they could be offloading their shares already in the following quarter. You don't know about that yet. Where I've got an example here, actually, the NASDAQ website hasn't updated it since it's new today, but Wells Fargo did cut their stake by over half, selling a couple million shares in their last 13F filing. They previously had 5.2 million shares. But either way, it's still a nice resource to check in detail on your own time. So for a bigger picture, which I think is actually more useful for comparison and for looking at the trend, I actually made a video showcasing the summary for institutionals almost 2 weeks ago for this video on Asian institutions that stepped up huge when buying Palantir shares. So feel free to check that out after this video. I go a little bit in more detail for those specific buyers. But in the beginning of the video, I gave the overall stats of institutional ownership. And when pulling them today 2 weeks later, we can see a jump already in institutional ownership in their shares, meaning there's more buying and holding outpacing any sells by institutions as more 13F filings come in. And we see that institutions previously owned around 35.03%, so that's a couple weeks ago, but now jumping to 36.48%, with the number of shares jumping from 2,014 million shares to 2,047 million shares. So that's about 33 million shares net in a couple weeks. Now, of course, the value is coming down with the price of the stock coming down also from when I made that video, but the percentage and share count is what's creeping up. And to see how this is being offset, we have a huge jump in new positions from 119 to 146 here. And that's with more than double the shares, while even though there is an increase in sold out positions from 67 to 78. So that is still outpaced by the shares sold, jumping from around 19 million sold out versus the 28 million bought. And to where we landed a couple weeks ago, this is the active positions comparison, where these metrics are pointing in the positive direction for institutional holders, of course. Now, what's more important than knowing this is happening is what does this actually mean, or should you even care about it? So to individual investors, a base of institutional ownership brings stability to a stock's price. But also in the case of groupthink, if institutions turn either in the positive or negative direction, they can also sway the company stock in those directions too with their price because they have so much more money, right? Outpacing the retailers. So for me personally, I just like to see this metric reach some form of stability, especially as a company matures. Now, if Palantir is playing the Wall Street game with GAAP profitability, share buybacks, and aiming for S&P inclusion, which we've all seen, I don't mind it as long as it's not the detriment to their growth. We all know for revenue growth that has decreased over time, but their guidance actually for next quarter is higher at around 16% instead of the 13% we just saw for the year-over-year comparison. So that's a re-acceleration, of course, if it takes a few quarters of that actually consistently going up. But in my earnings video, I do point out the leading metrics that gave me optimism and confidence that their product is gaining ground in the marketplace. So feel free to check that video out if you want more details on that. But what are your thoughts, though, on institutional ownership? Let me know below, and I'll see you in the next video.